Hi everyone, this video is all about how to pass functional skills English level 1. In this video I'll go through what is considered as good writing in terms of the exam. So we're going to talk about the criteria, then we're going to have a look at a few examples. The key skills you'll be assessed against, what punctuation you'll be expected to use, purpose and text types, exam overview, and then a look at the mark scheme with examples on composition. First, we're going to have a look at what is actually considered good writing. So for this exam, a good piece of writing must have some of the following elements. So some use of a varied and inventive vocab. That means you're not using the same words, that every now and then you're using what we might consider to be a slightly more sophisticated word. So instead of saying good or bad, we're looking for words like terrible or fantastic, just to kind of show that you've got a little bit more range in your vocabulary. So it needs to be concise, so that means short and to the point. So you try not to waffle if it's deemed unnecessary or use any unnecessary words. You can do this practice this by editing your work. So once you've written something, have a look through, especially if you're doing this on the computer, and just look, can I remove a few words? Can I make that sentence a little bit more punchier and a little bit better? And I'd read through that and check, see if you find that if the sentence is improved, and eventually with more practice that will flow into your normal everyday writing. Next, appropriate use of punctuation. Okay, so appropriate means you're not just throwing in an exclamation point there because you know the examiner is looking for some variety. So use it where it's appropriate. Some amount of imaginative detail that grips the reader's attention. So if you're writing a review about a restaurant, talk about dirty tablecloths that are stained, or talk about waiters who are arrogant and rude, or food that is cold and have got hairs in it, or anything like that that might give the reader that little bit more extra detail. Okay, so we're going to have a look at an example. So this is a piece of writing that I did, and I just want you to see if I've actually met the criteria we were just talking about. So I've taken this as an example of writing a letter to complain about a disruptive neighbour. So my neighbour is disruptive. They always play loud music late at night. I really don't like living next door to them. They are always leaving piles of rubbish outside their house. Okay, so that is my first response to this, and we're going to pull up the criteria in a second. Okay, so I should have used some use of varied and inventive vocab. So am I repeating myself, or am I using any decent language? I'd say the word disruptive there is quite good. It needs to be concise. Yeah, it's fairly concise, really. I mean, I could have said I don't like living next to them rather than I really don't, but I think that really there kind of adds that feeling. Appropriate use of punctuation. I can only really see a couple of commas and full stops there, so you don't see any of the kind of anger or enthusiasm that I might feel with the neighbours being so unpleasant. And there's some amount of imaginative detail. This is a very short example. We know they're playing loud music, and we know that they've got rubbish, but we don't really know, what exactly the rubbish contains, if it's something really unpleasant, and we don't really know if I've even approached the neighbours and asked them to turn the music down. So all that detail might have kind of made it a bit more of a richer experience for the reader to imagine. Okay, so this is my new version. So my neighbour is disruptive. They always play loud music late at night or bang violently against the walls and shout. So I've really tried to go into detail about how they've been disruptive. I've also used the word violently there to kind of just show the kind of atmosphere they're creating. I really don't like living next door to them, and I've put an exclamation point there just to kind of show my enthusiasm that I really dislike it. They're always leaving piles of foul smelling rubbish. So rather than just saying rubbish, I've said that the rubbish is foul smelling. Just to kind of add that detail, and then I've included the extra detail. Why do I hate that rubbish? And it's that it makes the whole area look untidy. So I've tried to kind of take that criteria in, and I've just added a little bit more detail, and I think my vocab is a little bit better as well. I like, foul is quite an odd word that we don't really use so much, and I've used the word violently there to kind of make it a little bit more detailed. And you'll see that I haven't just used my full stops and my commas. I've also managed to get an appropriate use of an exclamation point in there. Now, it's up to you whether you want to include these things in, but it's down to the writer's choice. But if you feel like an exclamation point needs to go into something, then by all means I'd just include it. It doesn't always have to be to show that someone is shouting, it can just be to show some enthusiasm or passion about something. Okay, so next we're going to talk about some of the punctuation that you need to be able to demonstrate that you know how to use this. Okay, so first of all, we've got the classic, we've got the full stops and the question marks. So by now you should know that full stop is used to express a statement. So when we do sentence constructions, a full stop is usually used when we say one thing. That would be like a clause in a sentence. So if we had multiple clauses, we'd use commas or something. So I hate Mondays is a statement. I put a full stop to show that my statement is over. A question mark, okay, so it's whenever I have a statement that starts with, where, why, or how, or anything like that, it tends to be a question sentence. And think, does this require an answer? If not, it's rhetorical and it still needs a question mark. Okay, next, commas is used to separate related information in a clause. So we see our example here, I hate Mondays, so that's our first statement, but we want to kind of add detail into that. I hate Mondays, I always have terrible lessons. So if you're not using commas in your functional skills exam, that's a really bad thing because that means it hasn't quite got enough detail in there. So always think, if you've got a statement that's just like, I hate Mondays, can I put a comma in there and can I add that little bit of extra detail to get those extra marks? Okay, continued. Okay, so we've got the exclamation marks, something I've talked about before. So used to show excitement, surprise, or anything that is significant. Okay, here's my example. Upon walking in the restaurant, I found all the tablecloths were dirty. So that has been used to kind of show that, it's my surprise. The tablecloth certainly shouldn't have been dirty. Next, we've got possessive apostrophes, and this is quite a difficult punctuation mark to use. So possessive apostrophe is like a comma that's like up at the top of a letter. And they're used to show ownership, not when it's plural, and that's a really kind of important distinction. So plural is when we have an S on the end of it. So if I said the students were all walking to class, that would just be students with an S to show there's more than one student. But in this case, when I'm using this example, the student's homework was not marked on time. If I'm talking about one student, I'd put student apostrophe S, but if I'm talking about multiple students, I'm going to put students plural and then the apostrophe on the other side of the S. It's a very difficult distinction to get, but one piece of advice I would give with punctuation is you're going to lose more marks if you try not to use a punctuation mark than if you ever use a punctuation mark incorrectly. Okay, because everyone can make the occasional mistake in terms of punctuation, in terms of spelling, but to not kind of make that attempt is far worse. It shows to the examiner, which might not be the case. It shows the examiner that you actually do not know anything about that punctuation or that word that you're trying to use. So keep in mind that a certain amount of inaccuracy is actually allowed in this exam. They're not always looking for 100% accuracy with these things, but do try and be accurate. But just keep that in mind. So I just want to give you an overview of some of the main text purposes that you might be asked to write for. So we have advise, which is when you are just suggesting something. It's quite gentle, but you're providing a person with options. Next we have inform, which is when you're kind of delivering information. Sometimes it can have a lot of facts, maybe have a few numbers or maybe a few percentages, which you're allowed to make up in this exam to support your point. Next we have persuade, which is a lot more forceful. It's about changing a person's mind. Okay, but if anybody wants a copy of these slides in a bit more detail, I'll make those available and I'll probably make a video going a bit more detail into these. But you'll realise that most purposes are just variations of these three different purposes, but it's a very kind of subtle change. So advice is kind of general term where you use phrases like you might like to, or it might be an idea to do this. So you're never really writing as an expert. You're just giving in your opinion, your viewpoint of what might be good. Next, inform. It's tends to be very dry, very factual, kind of professional feeling, and then persuade is a little bit more pushing the audience a little bit. Okay, so we've got three different purposes that I've written for here, and I just want you to take a moment to read through these and see if you can say which one is which. So our first one, you might want to look into the price of car insurance before you decide what car you want. So is that to persuade, inform, or advise? Next we've got, at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, witnesses reported hearing a loud scream. Next we've got, this is the greatest mobile phone that money could buy, why look anywhere else? So pause the video if you want, and remember that the three options are inform, persuade, and advise. So let's have a quick look at the answers. So that first one, you might want to look into the price of car insurance before you decide what car you want. Okay, so this one is to advise. Okay, so you're using phrases like you might like to, which it shows that the person is trying to help and isn't particularly invested in which side you go for. Next one is inform. So at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, witnesses reported hearing a loud scream. So I'm just trying to give information. I've also included the exact time because informs tends to be very, very factual rather than overly descriptive. And then next, this is the greatest mobile phone that money could buy. Why look anywhere else? So that one is to persuade, and you might see some elements of persuasive writing techniques. One thing they do is sometimes they'll do a rhetorical question, not always. So other times they might include detail to describe something. So I might say this mobile phone is sleek and beautiful in design. Things like that to really kind of paint a picture and make it as appealing as possible. Whereas inform would only give you information that would help you know the facts of the event. Okay, so an overview of some of the different text types. So you've got your purpose, but then you've also got the different text types that you might be asked to write about. So emails and letters are really, really similar. The only difference really is that emails have a web address and a subject, whereas letters have those two addresses. Other than that, they're pretty much the same. They tend to be written to one person. Sometimes you can actually send, a group email, but I've never seen an exam question that asks you that. They tend to just have, a greeting and a sign off, and they tend to just be to one direct person. Now, articles are a little bit different. So these are generally written to entertain and inform. They always have a heading, and they usually have an interesting hook or topic sentence that interests the reader. Now, that's really important. So that means that instead of like giving an introduction in which it might be the case in like an essay or something like that, articles will start off with a really, really kind of interesting heading and then a first sentence. So screams were heard after a confrontation at a bar last night. That might be the first line, and then they'd go through their typical, who, what, where, why, and then go into more details in the subsequent paragraphs. Okay, so text types continue. The newsletters are one that's I think they're quite difficult really to know how to write, but once you know it's a lot easier. It's always the case. They're usually written to inform. The thing that sets newsletters apart is that they tend to be kind of broken down into sections. So if I saw a newsletter, I'd expect to see a title, quite similar to an article, but I'd also expected to see some use of subheadings, a real kind of clear structure with your paragraphs. It needs to be kind of set out in a way that the person reading it needs to be able to like locate certain information really easy. So you might have, if it was on like a village fair, you might have a subheading with fun things to do. You might need to have another subheadings with important information. That'll be like finishing times, starting times, any allergy advice or anything like that. Not that you'd have to be that specific, I don't think, in this exam. Next, we have a speech. So this one is very different. So this one is written as if you were speaking to people. It's delivered to an audience at larger, and it tends to be quite persuasive. Think if you want to know what a speech looks like, look at Martin Luther King. I Have a Dream. Really, really fantastic speech. And it's really strange because you write as if you're talking to an individual. You might use words like you and we and our, but you're using those words to actually talk to the mass, and by using those words, you talk to the individual and to everyone in the room at the same time. And usually you can have like a greeting and a sign off at the end of those. So usually you could speak to people, but Martin Luther King didn't he said, "I have a dream." That's how he started. But there you go. Okay, so this is a text type quiz. Okay, so I've got 5 questions, and they each relate to a certain text type that we've spoken about. Okay, so number 1 needs to have a title that grabs the reader's attention and has a strong topic sentence. So think about the text types that we've just looked at. Which one do you think that would be? And if you've forgotten, we had speeches, newsletters, articles, letters, and emails. I think that's all of them. Number 2 needs a subject field to be filled in, and the correspondence is usually to one person. Number 3 is a text that relies heavily on its layout features to break information down into small, manageable chunks. Number 4 is a form of communication with 2 addresses and a greeting. And number 5 is often an emotional form of writing delivered to more than one person. So I'll just give you a few moments, guys. If you want, feel free to pause the video and write down your answers now. Okay, and I'm just going to give you the answers now. So number 1 is an article, so that's the one with a heading and a strong first line. Number 2 is an email, because it's got the subject field in, the only form that ever has a subject field. Number 3 is a newsletter, because it's got the heavily relies on layout features, and when I talk about layout features, I mean subtitles, titles, might have images, although you're not expected to draw any. You might have italics, and you might have bullet points. Number 4, a form of communication with 2 addresses and a greeting, so that would be the letter. And then number 5, an emotional form of writing, so that is speech. So here's an overview of the exam. It's 60 minutes in length and it's 36 marks in total. This is on the front of the exam paper, by the way, guys. So task 1 is 21 marks in total, and the exam paper actually recommends 35 minutes for you to spend on this one. So it's a much larger response that is required, and it will tell you when it actually comes to the word count that task 1 tends to ask for a little bit more. Task 2 is 15 minutes in total, and they recommend you spend about 25 minutes. It's always recommended that you plan. However, exercise caution, guys, because when they say plan, they don't want you to spend. I wouldn't say don't spend more than 5 minutes. I mean, if even 5 minutes is probably too long. A plan should literally just be a jotting of a few notes. Really shouldn't take out too much of your time. So really do exercise caution, because a few people spend so long on planning that they end up not being able to actually write much in the actual physical exam. So always be aware of that. So this is what the mark scheme looks like, and I'll try and explain this to you. So you'll be marked on the following elements. So you've got the indicative content. So this is just the things that show that you've read and understood the question. It's all the information that they've included in the information box, and it's the things that show that you've written to the correct person and you've written on the correct topic that they've been talking about. Also that you've included those, you've addressed those 3 bullet points. Remember, you must address those 3 bullet points. Next we have composition. So these are things like sentence variation. Now sentence variation is a strange thing. Essentially what it comes down to is having sentences that aren't all the same length. Okay, I'm putting that kind of in a bit of a silly term, but sentence variation, we tend to have 3 sentence types, which is simple, compound, and complex, and that essentially is short, medium, and long sentences. Then you get marks on your vocabulary, so using some of those unfamiliar or more interesting words, how much it makes sense, and how it fits in with the formats, the format and the audience. So the particular format is the text type that they've actually asked you to write in, and the audience is have they asked you to write it for a school, or have they asked you to write it for an adult audience. Always write in paragraphs, and paragraphs, if you're unsure, you change it to a new paragraph whenever you want to change topic, and this is largely down to the writer's discretion. Okay, but as long as the actual examiner can see that there's been a reason why you've changed paragraph, then that'll be fine. But if you don't, you will get a very low mark. So please don't just write one huge paragraph. Finally, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. As I've said before, the occasional mistake is okay. It's better to try and use a big word or a certain kind of punctuation and get it wrong than it is to not try it at all. Remember, we all make mistakes and we're all human, and I think this exam reflects that quite nicely. So I'm going to go through some composition examples. So for task 1, you get 12 marks and you need to demonstrate both that the sentences make sense with an appropriate level of detail suited to the specific audience and purpose, and also correct use of paragraphs and formats. So let's have a look at that first one. The food at the restaurant was disgusting. Everything had a slippery texture and didn't seem to be cooked. So that's what I would interpret as sentences that make sense and it has that appropriate level of detail. You see, I've said that the restaurant was disgusting and I could have left it at that, but it's really limited. So I've used my comma, I've said everything had a slippery texture and didn't seem to be cooked. So I've tried to kind of paint a picture of what the experience is like. Okay, and then next we're looking at the correct use of paragraphs and format. So if you're looking at my example, you should automatically know what format I've written this for, what text type I've written this for. So it says the disastrous delivery. Disaster struck Mama's little bakery on Sunday evening when the delivery truck reversed into the front window. So straight away, guys, you should know that that is my attempt to write for an article, and you should be able to see that first of all I've got that all-important heading and I've got an interesting first sentence that gives you an idea of what the story is about and also kind of makes you want to read on. And so that would be my interpretation of me meeting these two criteria for composition. So we've got some different examples for the other kinds of composition that you might need to show. So we've got the different sentences. This includes complex sentences. So a complex sentence is just a longer sentence with a little bit more detail. In this case, it's my second sentence. So nobody in the restaurant seemed to be enjoying the meal, and who could blame them? So it's one that kind of continues on quite a while. Is a simple way of putting it. So you got the food is disgusting. That's my first sentence. That's a really simple, short sentence. And then it finishes with I didn't eat my food because it was disgusting. So that because there makes it a compound sentence because it's two ideas or two opposing ideas or two related ideas joined together. So we could have like you could have words like but and or, but just as long as you're using that variation and that all your sentences don't look the same, you should be okay. Okay, our next one is a varied use of vocab. So everyone at Mama's Little Bakery said it was a disaster, that never had anything so bad ever happen to their establishment. So I've just used that word disaster there, even though I've got quite basic words within it. I've also used disaster, which is quite an interesting word there, just to kind of change the vocab a little bit and make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm not just using the word bad or good and things like that. Okay, finally guys, if you did like this video and if you did get all the way through to the end, well done and thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe. For any more videos, be sure to check out our partner channel of Right On Resources, some really good English based resources on there for you, and thanks for watching.